They said the war was over, that machines had learned mercy. But on Khepri-III, beneath a sky carved by plasma storms, one man found the truth. And the truth still burned. A fallen pilot, a creature born for war, and an order that should never have been given. When the sky turned to fire and the ground to glass, he had a choice: obey the system that created him, or save the life it was built to destroy. Stay with this story, because by the time you reach the end, you'll understand why even in a universe run by machines, mercy might be the most dangerous weapon left. The sky over Khepri-III had been almost calm 10 minutes before impact. Now it was tearing itself apart. Sheets of blue-white plasma peeled across the upper atmosphere. They lit the night like veins of burning glass. Commander Raylan Vane rode the turbulence inside a Falcon 13 tactical skimmer. The cockpit shook around him in hard, metallic shivers. Warning glyphs strobed across his visor in tight red columns. Altitude bleed. Hull stress. Ion saturation threshold exceeded. Above him, invisible in the glare, the orbital lance array was firing again. Each shot speared down from the Atlas 9 Sentinel network. Each shot carved a new wound into the desert world below. His skimmer banked automatically to match the latest targeting solution. The flight computer nudged the stick under his fingers. "Trust the vector," the system whispered in its flat synthetic tone. "That is what it is for." Raylan tightened his hand on the stick. He could feel the old urge rising to switch the controls to full manual. He stared at the trail of symbols marking his formation on the visor. Blue icons, perfect lines, no deviation. Then the voice of High Colonel Auric Vale cut in over the command channel. "Emotion is entropy," Vale said. The words were calm. They were the same words Raylan had heard 100 times in training. The moment. You allow feeling to distort a trajectory, you are already dead. Raylan clenched his jaw. Static crawled along the edge of the transmission. The storm above Khepri-III was eating into the band. "Vanguard wing," Vale continued. "Lock to Atlas 9 guidance and maintain Corridor Delta 7. No improvisation. No heroics. Execute the doctrine." "Yes, sir," the formation replied as one. Raylan did not add his voice. He watched the path Atlas 9 painted for them, a narrow ribbon of calculated survival threaded between rising ion columns. Every other path ended in red. His skimmer jolted. A beam from the orbital lance array slashed past off his nose. The air itself seemed to scream. Shockwaves rippled through the thin atmosphere and slammed into his hull. "Falcon 13, adjust attitude 4 degrees starboard," the computer intoned, "compensating for refractive distortion." "I can see it," Raylan muttered. He corrected the stick a fraction ahead of the command. The system chirped a soft rebuke. "Manual input outside optimal window. Recommend full handoff to Atlas 9. Another blast from orbit hit the ground miles ahead. Sand and fused rock leapt upward in a vast blooming column. For a moment, the entire horizon became a wall of fire. Raylan felt the shockwave as a deep pressure against his chest. Khepri-III was not a forgiving world. Its deserts were laced with ferrosilica and buried conductors. Every lance strike woke the planet like a drum. The Falcon 13 shuddered as the wavefront reached him. His altitude dropped 300 meters in a breath. "Stabilizers at limit," the computer reported. "Recommend transfer of full control to Atlas 9. On his visor, the flight path flickered. For one aching heartbeat, all the blue icons around him jumped. They no longer formed a perfect line. "We have scatter," someone shouted on the wing channel. "Vanguard actual. Confirm guidance integrity." Another voice cut across the noise. This one was colder. "Atlas 9 is compensating," Vale said. "Maintain trust in the system. Emotion is entropy. Your fear changes nothing." Raylan swallowed. His mouth tasted of metal and ozone. He remembered another sky, another world. The day a targeting solution from Atlas 9 had walked a line of lances across a refugee column. The system had called it collateral. Vale had called it necessary to end the conflict. Raylan still saw the patterns of bodies when he closed his eyes. He blinked hard and forced his focus back to the present. Another shock slammed into his skimmer. Warning glyphs went from red to white. Falcon 13, the computer said. Autopilot has lost coherent data from Atlas 9, switching to degraded navigation mode. The sky around him flickered. Plasma arcs danced against the canopy like claws of light. For a brief instant, every other skimmer in his formation vanished behind static. Then they reappeared, but out of alignment. Vectors diverged. He saw one icon spike upward into a forbidden zone of glowing blue. The feed cut off as a lance strike erased it. Raylan cursed under his breath. Requesting direct link to Atlas 9, he said. Rerouting, the computer replied. What came back was not guidance. It was a single blunt error code. No solution, the system told him. Atmospheric conditions exceed predictive capacity. Recommend abort. Abort where? Raylan whispered. There was no safe corridor. The ridge of glass rose ahead of him, jagged and shimmering. It was a band of fused silica cliffs carved by ancient strikes. Tonight it glowed with reflected fire. Vale spoke again on the command channel. All Vanguard units, he said. Initiate emergency dispersal and climb. Let Atlas 9 recalculate from orbit. Do not deviate individually. Deviation is failure. Raylan looked at his altitude. He looked at the turbulence graphs climbing into chaos. A part of him waited for the familiar hand of the machine to take over, to pull him clear, to decide for him. Instead, his skimmer bucked violently. Something in the undercarriage tore with a shriek of metal. The left engine status flickered and went dark. Thrust asymmetry critical, the computer snapped. Recommend eject, recommend eject, recommend eject. Shut up, Raylan hissed. He fought the yaw with his remaining engine. For a heartbeat, he leveled the Falcon 13. The ridge of glass filled his viewport like a wall of knives. Time stretched thin across the burning air. He could see each shard, each blade, each reflection of orbital fire. Vale's voice was still in his ear. Emotion is entropy, it said again. Do not attempt heroics, Commander Vane. Raylan reached up and killed the command channel with a single thumb press. Silence rushed in around the roar of the storm. The Falcon 13 dropped out of the sky. It fell toward the ridge of glass trailing fire. The impact came like a hammer. For a moment there was nothing but light and sound. Then there was only darkness. Raylan woke to the smell of hot glass and burning insulation. His ears rang with a high, steady tone. For several long seconds he could not remember his own name. He lay on his back, staring up at a sky torn into strips of blue flame. Fragments of his canopy were embedded in the fused sand around him. They shone like broken mirror teeth. He tried to move, and pain forked through his left side. Suit diagnostics scrolled in the lower edge of his visor. 3 cracked ribs, bruising, no major bleeding. He forced himself upright. The Falcon 13 was no longer a skimmer. It was a pile of torn metal half buried in molten glass. Heat shimmered off every surface. The ridge of glass rose around the crash site like a frozen wave. Its walls were layered with translucent sheets. They caught the light of distant lance strikes and sent it skittering across the valley. Raylan turned in a slow circle, checking horizon markers. The navigation overlay tried to align itself. It failed. Atlas 9 was not responding to his suit ping. For the first time since he had joined the Terran Strategic Command, the sky above him was mute. Falcon 13 to Vanguard Wing, he said. Respond. Only static answered. He swallowed. The suit air tasted dry and faintly metallic. He checked his sidearm. The pistol was intact, snug in its holster at his thigh. He checked the emergency kit, 1 water module, 1 medfoam injector. One flare, no transport, no evac beacon with a range strong enough to pierce an ion storm. He heard something shift behind him, a weight being dragged across glass. Raylan turned, pistol half drawn. The sound came from beneath a twisted section of hull. The metal sheet was buckled upward, as if something had rammed it from below. He stepped closer, heat radiated from the wreckage in slow waves. Another sound came, a low, rough exhale, not mechanical. He set his glove against the hull and pushed. Muscles screamed in protest. The sheet moved a fraction. A line of dim light opened beneath it. Something glowed there. Not metal, not fire. It was a band of soft blue phosphor, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. Raylan wedged his shoulder under the edge of the plate. He heaved. The hull groaned and tilted. The gap widened. He saw fur first. Dark, coarse, matted with blood and fused glass dust. Then he saw the limb attached to it. It was not a leg he recognized from any species of earth animal. It was built like the forelimb of a great cat, but corded with dense muscle and lined with subdermal fiber. Conductive filaments gleamed where the skin had been torn. Beyond the limb, a body filled the space like a crashed fighter. Wings were folded tight along its back. Feathers made of overlapping plates shimmered between black and electric blue. The creature's head lay on the glass, turned toward him. Two eyes watched him through the dim light. They were the color of molten copper. They focused. They narrowed. Raylan froze. "Skylion," he whispered. He had seen them once before, in a hangar sealed under 6 levels of clearance. Project footage, grainy and full of static. Living weapons built from avian DNA and engineered magnetoplasma cells. Designed to hunt low-flying craft through ion storms where machines failed. Decommissioned after Atlas 9 concluded they were too unpredictable. The official report had said all specimens were terminated. The creature in front of him was very clearly not terminated. Its chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged breaths. One wing was trapped under the hull fragment. The other sprawled out, plates cracked, tiny sparks flickering between them. The smell of scorched protein and ozone hung in the air. Raylan slid the pistol fully from its holster. His training moved faster than his thoughts. Unidentified biosign. Potential threat. Eliminate before it can move. The creature's gaze followed the pistol. Its pupils tightened. A faint rumble started in its chest. Not a growl of aggression. More like the tremor of overtaxed muscles trying not to collapse. He could see the Terran Strategic Command emblem reflected in its eyes. The winged spear. The symbol of the force that had bred its kind. He realized it recognized that emblem. He had no idea how he knew. He simply felt it. Above them, the storm rolled on. The sky flickered. Raylan's suit finally caught a fragment of a broadcast. Atlas 9. Sentinel Network. Formally initiating protocol eclipse, a remote voice said. Confirming atmospheric interference beyond predictive limits. All unclassified biosigns within operational radius will be treated as contamination. Orbital Lance Array reset to wide pattern. The message repeated. Calm, precise, sure of its own necessity. Raylan's visor overlaid new data. 2 primary biosignatures glowed in the valley grid. One was his. The other pulsed weakly beneath him. The reticle from his pistol synced with the target marker automatically. He did not need Atlas 9 to tell him what the doctrine required. If he killed the creature, his own chance of being flagged as contamination dropped. One target was easier to classify than 2. He raised the pistol. The barrel lined up with the space between the creature's eyes. Those copper eyes did not close. They did not look away. They simply stared at him through the smoke and the reflections of distant fire. For a moment, the world narrowed to that gaze. Raylan's finger tightened on the trigger. He saw other eyes overlaid with these, eyes of children staring up at a sky full of falling light. Eyes on that other world, the one Atlas 9 had burned for the sake of efficiency. Vale's voice echoed in his memory. Emotion is entropy. You do not regret the solution. You regret that you looked at it. Raylan's hand shook. The pistol's muzzle wavered. The creature's nostrils flared. It inhaled a shallow, broken breath. Its chest hitched as if each draw of air scraped against knives. Something like a spark jumped between them. Not telepathy, not magic, just the raw human recognition of pain in another living thing. Raylan exhaled slowly. His finger eased off the trigger. He lowered the pistol. Not again, he said softly. The creature blinked. Its gaze followed the motion of the pistol down. Raylan holstered the weapon with a decisive shove. Above them, the sky brightened. The storm front was moving back across the ridge of glass. Static crawled along the edges of every shard. Raylan's suit warned of an incoming surge. I know what the doctrine says, he murmured, but I am done letting it write my hands. He tapped a control at the base of his skull. A soft chime sounded as his neural link to the Terran strategic command lattice attempted to reconnect. He refused the handshake. Manual override menu bloomed in his peripheral vision. Warning, the suit said. Disconnection from strategic network will remove navigation, medical, and targeting support. Do it, Raylan said. He selected hard sever. The icon representing his link to Atlas 9 flickered, then went black. For an instant he felt naked. He had trained with that connection since his first day in uniform. It had been the constant background hum beneath every battle. Now there was only his own breathing and the distant thunder of the storm. He reached up to the small jack behind his ear. The socket was still warm from recent use. He gripped the embedded chip between two fingers and pulled. Pain lanced down his spine. He gritted his teeth and kept pulling. The chip came free with a faint, wet sound. He let it fall onto the glass. Then he brought his pistol butt down on it. The hardware cracked. Tiny components scattered like dark seeds. Link severed, the suit confirmed. No reconnection possible without replacement hardware. Good, he said. He turned back to the creature under the hull. Asha, he thought suddenly. The name came from somewhere deep, a word he had once heard in a story about hope. He did not say it aloud. Not yet. The storm reached them. Lightning crawled down the sky in thick branching ropes. The air turned sharp and metallic. Pressure climbed. Raylan looked at the exposed wing plates along the creature's back. They were built to drink electricity and turn it into motion. Right now, they were cracked and unaligned. If the storm hit them full on, it would finish what the crash had started. He needed cover. He scanned the wreckage of the Falcon 13. A section of external armor lay nearby. It had sheared off during impact, and now leaned at an angle against a fractured spur of glass. He staggered over to it. Heat seared through his gloves as he set his hands on the edge. He heaved. The plate was heavy, but inertia favored him once it started to move. He dragged it across the glass, leaving scorched tracks. The creature watched him. Its head turned fractionally to follow his struggle. He brought the plate to the hull fragment that pinned the wing. Carefully, he wedged the armor between the fallen metal and the exposed body. Easy, he said. I am not here to finish you. The creature's eyes flicked from his face to the plate, its muscles tensed. Together, they shifted enough weight for the wing to slide free a few centimeters. The creature hissed in pain, then it drew the injured limb in toward its body. Raylan tipped the armor plate forward. He forced it down until it arched over the creature like a crude shield. He left just enough gap for air. The first real lash of the storm hit a heartbeat later. Plasma slammed into the ridge of glass. It ran in liquid lines down every surface. Light poured over the crash site in a flood. The armor above them rang like a struck bell. Heat pressed against Raylan's back. His visor dimmed to block the glare. He hunched beside the creature under the improvised shelter. Every hair on his arms prickled inside the suit fabric. Arcs of stray charge crawled along the edges of the plate. He could feel the raw energy trying to reach the magnetoplasma cells in the creature's wings. He leaned his shoulder harder into the shield. His ribs screamed. He did not move. For a moment, human and weaponized animals shared the same tiny pocket of shadow at the center of a storm. Raylan listened to the creature's breathing over the roar of falling fire, slow, ragged, still there. Time stretched, then blurred. Outside, the sky of Khepri-III kept burning. Inside the shield of scorched metal, one man and one broken sky lion refused to let go. The storm did not end. It only moved farther down the ridge. Lightning still stitched the horizon in jagged white scars, but above the wreck, the sky over Khepri-III began to thin. The roar softened to a dull, endless growl. Under the battered armor plate, Raylan Vane finally let his muscles unlock. He eased his shoulder away from the shield. Heat radiated out of the metal in long, slow breaths. Beside him, the sky lion lay motionless. Its chest still rose and fell. Each breath sounded like sand dragged over glass. He drew in air through his teeth. His ribs throbbed with every move. The suit kept whispering about rest and painkillers. He ignored it. He listened instead. There was another sound now, a faint crackle in his left ear. It was not the random hiss of the storm. It was too regular, too patterned. He turned his head, angling the suit antenna toward clearer sky. The crackle sharpened. Then a voice pushed through. "Any surviving Terran units in Sector 9 Delta?" The signal was chewed by static. "This is Station Orun. Groundside rescue and triage." He swallowed. "Station Orun. This is Commander Raylan Vane," he said. His own voice sounded rough and small. "Falcon 13, Vanguard Wing. I am down in the ridge." There was a pause. More static. He imagined the ionized air twisting his words into knots before they ever reached the ground. Then the voice came back, clearer and closer. "Commander Vane, I have you," it said. The speaker was female, calm, not tired. "This is Sarah Venn, Chief Systems Engineer, Station Orun. Your transponder vanished during the Omega storm. We thought your whole wing was gone." "Most of it is," Raylan said. He looked at the melted debris of the Falcon 13. "At least one skimmer is down for good." "I am seeing one major biosign," Sarah said. "Wait, correction. 2. One human, one anomalous. Commander, what did you bring into that valley with you?" Raylan glanced at the shape beside him. The sky lion slept or drifted in the edge of shock. Its wings were still tucked under the shield of scorched metal. "I came down with debris," he said. Some of it fought back. Sarah exhaled softly on the channel. "That is not funny," she said. "But I do not have time to argue about jokes. We have a bigger problem." "Bigger than a crash in the ridge of glass," Raylan said. "Bigger than losing Atlas 9 guidance." "Yes," she said. Her tone changed. The weariness dropped away. Only urgency remained. "We picked up an emergency ping just before the Omega front rolled over you. Beacon 717. His visor tagged the name automatically. "Beacon 717, he repeated. "Location, Vera Ravine," Sarah said. "South by 12 clicks from your position. A transport from Citadel Concord Prime, civilian contract. It went down when the first Lance strikes destabilized the air lanes." Raylan frowned. Why was a civilian transport in a fire corridor? Because the war does not stop needing supplies, Sarah said. And someone decided children could ride the same routes as shells. The words hit harder than the storm had. "Children," Raylan said. "Age range 7 to 12, Sarah replied. "Evac from the outer townships." They were scheduled for transfer off-world before the last escalation. Their pilot did not get your training. He flew blind through a warning grid and lost lift in the turbulence. The transport crashed in the ravine. The automatic beacon is still transmitting. No adult voices have answered. Raylan closed his eyes for a heartbeat. He saw again the images he had never been able to forget. Lines of civilians walking under a sky that glowed with incoming fire, the way their heat signatures had looked from orbit, the way the doctrine had turned people into patterns. "Send drone medics," he said, "or a crawler. Anything with wheels." "We tried," Sarah said, 3 times. "The ionization in Vera Ravine is off every chart we have. The probes lose control and auger into the walls in under 30 seconds. We do not even get clean footage out before they burn." "Then send a skimmer," he said automatically. "Plenty of those up top." "The Omega Storm took every airframe we had in range," Sarah said, "except you. And whatever is lying next to you right now." Raylan did not answer. A distant lance strike flared over the horizon. Its reflection ran along the glass like a strip of molten silver. "What is it, Commander?" Sarah asked. "I am not blind up here. The sensor suite on Orun is old, but it still knows mammals from birds and both from other things. That second biosign is not human, not standard wildlife either." Raylan watched the slow rise of the great chest under the shield. He watched the faint shiver of the wing plates as they tried to hold some pattern. "A relic," he said at last. "Something Atlas 9 was supposed to erase." "Well, it did not," Sarah said. "And right now physics is telling me something ugly. Hovercraft cannot get into Vera. Wheels cannot. Autonomous drone wings cannot. Anything that relies on standard control surfaces loses the fight with the ion channels. But our atmosphere models keep spitting out one almost stable corridor solution." "Almost stable is what killed my wing," Raylan said. "Your wing did not have a living air frame," Sarah replied. He stared down at the shadow under the plate. "You cannot be suggesting—" "You know I am," Sarah said. "That thing was built to fly where machines fail. You have no ride. It has no guidance. Beacon 717 will go silent long before this storm is done. You know what that means." He did not need her to say it. In a place like Vera Ravine, exposed to collapsing cliffs and wandering lance fire, emergency beacons did not stop transmitting because batteries died. They stopped because no one remained to push the manual override. Raylan looked at his gloved hands. They were still shaking from holding the shield. "Even if it could fly," he said, "it would never let me near it. These things were meaner than any machine. They were designed to be." "Maybe," Sarah said, "but I am reading its vitals through the noise. It is alive. It is also failing. If you walk away now, both biosigns in that valley will be gone before dawn. You and it." The channel clicked softly. Sarah lowered her voice. "TSC already flagged your link as lost," she said. "Vale will be watching for anomalies. If you want to be more than a notation on his next after-action report, you need a way out. That might be the only set of wings left on this side of the planet." Her words hung in the thin air between bursts of thunder. Raylan looked at the creature again. It lay with its head turned just enough that one copper eye could see him. The lid fluttered faintly. He could not tell if it understood anything they were saying. He only knew that, so far, it had not tried to tear him apart. The storm grumbled farther away. The air trembled with distant energy. "Time," he thought, "is not on anyone's side. Stay on this channel," he told Sarah. Then he cut his mic and moved closer to the Sky Lion. He needed to know exactly how broken it was. He shoved the armor plate aside a fraction. Cooler air slipped under the edge. The creature's nostrils flared as the new current touched its face. Raylan slid along the glass toward its neck. From here, he could see the interface ports just behind the skull ridge. Small circular nodes set into the skin, ringed with scar tissue. They were not natural. He had seen similar ports on drone controllers and early combat exosuits. Humans had put those there. Humans like him. He opened his med kit and took out a diagnostic collar. It was a ring of composite lined with flexible sensors. Normally, it went around the neck of a wounded soldier or a downed pilot. Tighten, tap, and the suite would begin streaming a full readout to the suit. He studied the size of the sky lion's throat. The collar would not close completely. He would have to improvise. He thumbed it open and reached toward the creature's neck. The reaction was instant. A surge of charge leapt from its skin to the metal in his hand. Light flashed along the plates as small arcs danced from ridge to ridge. Every hair on his arm tried to stand beneath the suit. The collar slipped from his grip and clattered onto the glass. His hand tingled for several seconds. "Not friendly," he muttered. The creature's eye tracked the fallen ring. Its breathing quickened. Fear. He heard it as clearly as he would have heard a human gasp. It remembered something about collars. He reached for the discarded device more slowly this time. He kept his other hand open, palm out, so the creature could see his movements. "I am not here to chain you," he said. "I am trying to see if you can live long enough to help those kids." His voice sounded absurd in his ears. He was talking to an animal built in a lab. But the copper eye stayed on him. Its pupil did not shrink. It did not flare. It just watched. He picked up the collar and adjusted its diameter. He stripped off a strip of padding and tossed it aside to expose more of the non-conductive layer. Then he shifted position, placing himself where the creature would have to twist painfully to reach him with teeth or claws. He eased the ring toward the neck again. A hum built in the air. The skin around the interface ports rippled. Electric potential climbed. He could feel it pressing against the sensors in his gloves. He stopped before contact. "Easy," he whispered. "I am not one of the techs that wired you. I am just the idiot who flew with the doctrine they left behind." His throat tightened. The ship hangar, the grainy feeds, the way the sky lions had looked pacing inside containment fields, wings restless, eyes tracking every movement. He swallowed. "I was one of them," he said. "The ones who sent you into storms and called you assets. The ones who let Atlas 9 write your death sentence into a line of code. I cannot say I am sorry in any way that matters, but I can try to not do it again." The words hung ridiculously in the charged air. The creature's breathing slowed by a fraction. Its eye blinked once. Then the hum lessened. The potential dropped slightly. Raylan moved the ring the last few centimeters. It touched skin. There was a snap. A small jerk ran through the sky lion's body. But the big muscles did not convulse. No arcs leapt. The collar seated itself around the thick neck. Not tight, but firm enough for the sensors to press against living tissue. Data began to scroll inside his visor. Heart rate, respiration, core temperature, electromuscular activity. He saw the pattern of its nervous system overlaid on a ghost image of its body. Hybrid musculature, magnetoplasma lattice along the wings, stress fractures through 3 major support bones, burned tissue along the left flank. It should have been dead. The readout said the same thing his eyes said. The only reason it still lived was that every cell in its body had been built to endure more than any natural creature. "Can it fly?" Sarah's voice cut back in. Raylan realized he had left his mic on receive. "Not now," he said. "Maybe not ever. But the lattice is still taking charge. The wing cores are not fully burned out. If I can stabilize them and keep it from cooking itself, there is a chance." "You sound like you have seen one of those things up close before," Sarah said. "I saw files," he replied, "and a hangar door I was not allowed to cross." He looked at the interface ports again. "Do you have any record that Project Sky Lion used neural harness tech?" "Stand by," Sarah said. He heard keys and distant voices. A moment later, she came back with a tone that suggested she was standing somewhere she should not be. "I just broke into a retired archive node," she said. Short answer, yes. They used a modified harness Mark 7 to sync handler and subject in early trials. They got higher control, but the feedback fried a lot of brains, animal and human. Raylan looked down at the creature. Its lids were drooping again. The sensor feed showed its heart slowing. "The modified harness," he said. "Would any of that gear still be standard issue on a Vanguard skimmer?" "Negative," Sarah said. "Not officially." But Terran Strategic Command loves to recycle hardware into new shapes. Your crash site used to be a flight frame. Check your racks. Raylan pushed himself to his feet. His ribs protested. He moved anyway. He crossed the wreck and climbed into what remained of the Falcon 13's aft compartment. Panels hung open. Racks were bent. He pushed aside charred packs and a half-melted crate. Behind them, bolted to the bulkhead, a black case waited. Its surface was unmarked, even in the heat. He thumbed the seal. The lid hissed. Inside lay a coil of cables and a spine-shaped frame. Neural harness MK7. Compact configuration. Someone at logistics had decided a veteran pilot might still be worth pairing with older tech. He stared at it for a long second. He knew how it worked. Ports at the base of the skull, electrode lines down the spine, a crown of contacts for sensory overlay. Plug the other end into a drone, a suit, an exoframe, or into something like the creature lying under the armor plate. "Found one, did you?" Sarah said. He realized he had stopped breathing. "It is here," he said. He lifted the harness out. It was meant to link a pilot to an unmanned gun cradle. The ports are standard Mark 7. "Same generation as the Sky Lion experiments," Sarah said, "which means you might be able to talk to it in the only language it was forced to learn, pain and flight." He carried the harness back to the creature. The frame flexed in his hands. It was light but felt heavier than any weapon he had ever held. "Commander," Sarah said quietly, "I have to ask you this. If you do this, you are giving up the last clean defense you have in front of TSC." "Right. Now you can still say you survived a crash and the animal crawled into your shadow. If you hard-link to a banned asset, Vale is going to call that treason. He will be right inside his own doctrine." Raylan laid the harness on the glass. Its neural nodes gleamed dully. He looked at the creature, at the faint tremor in its wing, at the way its eye seemed to be losing focus. "Emotion is entropy," he said. "That is what he taught us. But if all we keep is order, what are we defending?" Sarah did not answer. The channel went very quiet. Raylan knelt beside the Sky Lion's head. He lifted the harness and slid the spinal frame along his back. The suit reconfigured around it with a series of clicks. He felt cold metal settle along his spine. The contacts found his port at the base of his skull. A soft chime sounded. "Warning," the suit said. "Neural harness MK7 is not certified for combat use under current regulations. Feedback risk is severe." "Add it to my list of bad choices," he said. He confirmed the link. A second chime sounded, deeper. He took the other end of the harness and guided its connector toward one of the ports on the creature's neck. Its skin quivered. He stopped. "Listen," he said softly. "You want to survive, and you want those small voices to keep calling. So do I. But I cannot guess your wind. You were built for this sky. You know its currents better than any weather map. If we link, I will not be your handler. I will just be one more set of eyes, one more heart beating next to yours." His hand shook as he pressed the connector to the port. The node accepted the plug with a soft magnetic latch. The world shifted. Pain hit him first. Not his own. A second body overlaid his. Chest too wide, lungs too hot. Wings like long, burning arms filled with lightning. He gasped. His own ribs flared in sympathy. Through the link, he felt the raw ache of cracked bone and scorched tissue. He felt the old scars around the ports. Memory that was not quite memory, the echo of past flights. The sensation of invisible hands pushing his wings toward targets, the sudden perfect silence when those hands vanished and heat lances tore the air. He almost tore the harness off. His human nerves screamed at the intrusion. His heart hammered in a rhythm that doubled on itself. He heard a low sound and realized it was his own voice, a growl of pain that matched the one in the creature's throat. "Asha." The word came again. This time it felt like it belonged to both of them. The Sky Lion convulsed. Its claws dug into the glass. Sparks snapped between its wing plates. It thrashed once under the armor plate. Raylan braced a hand against its shoulder. "Easy," he gasped. "Easy! If you kill me, you lose your last idiot." Through the link, he pushed what little control he had. Not commands, just presence, the awareness of another heartbeat trying to match the ragged rhythm of its own. He forced his breathing to slow. In, out, in, out. The creature's chest rose in uneven time, then gradually found the same cadence. The feedback eased from blinding agony to tolerable fire. He could think again inside the shared space. 2 bodies, 1 pilot. Somewhere above the valley, sensors on Atlas 9 registered a new pattern. In the orbital array, spectrographs flickered. "High Colonel Vale," a tactical analyst said. "We have a consolidation of 2 biosigns in Sector 9 Delta, one tagged as Commander Raylan Vane. The other matches mass profiles from a restricted file. Classification points to Project Skylion." Vale stood before the main display in Citadel Concord Prime. He watched the icon bloom over the ridge of glass. Anger did not cross his face, only calculation. "Bring him in," he said, "alive if possible. The doctrine cannot bend, but it can still learn from its own errors." "Sir," the analyst said, "Atlas 9 requests permission to treat both signatures as contamination under Protocol Eclipse." Vale studied the numbers. Loss projections. Morale curves. Risk maps. A commander tipping into seditious compassion. A weapon that should not exist. Children in a ravine where no drone could fly. "Negative," he said at last. "Hold Eclipse in that grid. Lock Atlas 9 to capture mode. I want Vane under discipline again before this storm ends." "Understood, sir," the analyst said. Vale watched the storm pattern move across his display. He thought of Raylan as he had been. Precise, reliable. Never late to the briefing room, never off by more than a degree in his runs. Emotion is entropy, he thought. He had drilled that into every pilot under his command. Someone had to be the wall between chaos and the species. If that wall cracked, the whole structure fell. Below, in the valley, the wall had already begun to shift. Raylan stood beside the Skylion as the next bank of clouds rolled overhead. He could feel the change before he saw it. Through the harness, the air itself spoke. Temperature gradients, pressure dips, the invisible sculpting of the wind along the ridge of glass. The Skylion's instincts read it like text. He felt that reading as a ripple of tension across the shared nerves. "We have one more storm coming," Sarah said in his ear. "Smaller than the last front, but nasty enough. If you are going to move, you move with this one." He put his hand on the creature's neck. The fur was coarse and hot. The plates along its spine hummed softly. "Can you stand?" he whispered. He did not know if he spoke to it or to himself. The creature drew in a long breath. He felt the strain of muscles that had already done too much. Very slowly, it gathered its limbs under its body. Glass cracked under its weight. It pushed against the ground and rose. Raylan swayed as a second center of gravity shifted under his mind. 2 heights, 2 balances, his human feet on the glass, 4 taloned paws gripping the ridge. The Skylion shook itself. Shards of cooled silica rattled off its fur. Its injured wing hung lower than the other, but when it spread both, electricity flickered along the lattice. The storm above them rumbled approval. Raylan looked up at the torn sky. Then he looked toward where Vera Ravine lay, unseen beyond the shimmering waves of glass. Somewhere down there, Beacon 717 still called into the teeth of the storm. He tightened the harness straps across his chest. Pain lanced through both bodies. He accepted it. "We are going to fly," he said quietly. "To pull a handful of kids out of a doctrine that already wrote them off. You were built by the same hands that built the thing that tried to erase you. So was I. Maybe this once, we take that design and turn it against the script." The Skylion's head lifted. Its nostrils tasted the charged air. Its copper eyes narrowed at the horizon. Through the link, he felt a flicker of something new. Not obedience, not trust yet, but the faint alignment of intent, a shared direction. The wind shifted. The leading edge of the new storm swept over the ridge of glass. Lightning spidered through the clouds. Charges danced along the Sky Lion's wings. Raylan stepped closer and grabbed the harness grips along its shoulders. Every nerve in his body braced for the leap. The creature crouched, every muscle coiled. 2 heartbeats matched time. Then the Sky Lion jumped. Man and beast left the scarred glass together, rising into a sky that had never learned how to pity anything at all. The first jump felt like falling in every direction at once. Raylan's boots left the glass. The world yanked sideways. Weight vanished, then slammed back from an angle his inner ear had never rehearsed. He almost lost his grip on the harness handles. Only the neural harness Mach 7 kept him from tumbling off Asha's back. Through the link, momentum poured into him. Not numbers, not HUD symbols, just pure physical fact. Air density, wind shear, electric gradients along invisible channels. The Sky Lion's body read them and turned them into instinct. Those instincts flowed through the harness into Raylan's nervous system. It was like standing at the center of a storm with every sense rewired to feel vectors instead of temperature. "Commander!" Sarah Ven's voice crackled in his ear. "Your altitude is climbing fast. Transmission is degrading as you go. Confirm. Are you in the air?" He wanted to laugh. The sound that came out was more like a gasp. "In the air," he said, "on something that thinks it owns it." Asha's wings beat, each stroke carved through charged air like a blade. The magnetoplasma plates along her span hummed. Lightning licked at the edges and bled away in blue-white threads. Every impact rang through Rollins' borrowed senses as a deep-bellied vibration. He could feel the air stream over the curvature of each plate. He could feel which ones hurt. The left wing dragged. Stress fractures flared as red pain across his shared perception. He gritted his teeth and leaned, not with his human weight, but with the tiny influence the harness gave him. A suggestion, not a command. Asha adjusted, banking right, keeping the damaged wing out of the worst turbulence. "Good girl," he whispered. He wasn't sure whether the words made it past his own teeth or only through the neural link. Either way, he felt a faint answering flicker. Not comprehension, just the acknowledgement of another mind braced beside hers against the same wind. The ridge of glass fell away beneath them. From this height, the fused cliffs looked like the spine of some buried leviathan, half melted and polished by ancient fire. Beyond them, the desert stretched in broken mirrors. Lightning danced across every reflective surface, turning the world into a field of static. Somewhere far above, hidden behind cloud and ion haze, the orbital array circled. Within that ring of metal, Atlas 9 watched. In its core, raw data rolled in from hundreds of eyes, ground sensors, orbital spectrographs, residual atmospheric monitors from shattered drones. They painted a map of Khepri-III in shifting layers of color and code. A new pattern appeared. 2 biosignatures. Previously separate, now moved as one coherent vector. Velocity, increasing. Altitude rising. Direction, toward Vera Ravine. Atlas 9 cross-checked. One signature matched Commander Raylan Vane. The other pulled up restricted project files. Sky Lion Mass Index. Wing loading. Hybrid muscle ratios. A small flag lit up in the AI's judgment matrix. Uncontrolled biosynthetic asset in conjunction with compromised officer classification. Shifted. The pair stopped being contamination and became out-of-control vectored threat. Threats drew attention. In Citadel Concord Prime, a long, curved display updated. Stormfronts scrolled. Strike paths drifted. And a new icon pulsed above the ridge, a double signature, human and not. High Colonel Auric Vale watched it appear. His hands rested lightly on the rail, the way a surgeon might rest before the first. "Cut, Atlas 9, he said. "Confirm. New contact." The AI's voice came from the overhead. Speakers, level, genderless, contact. 9 Delta 7 consolidated biosign. 1 human, 1 biosynthetic, linked through Mark 7 neural coupling. Trajectory consistent with attempted penetration of Vera Ravine anomaly. Mark 7. Vale repeated. There was a faint twitch at the corner of his mouth. A relic that should have stayed in storage. Commander Vane's harness is not registered in active doctrine. Atlas 9 said, deviation. From authorized equipment loadout is noted. Deviation. The word had kept Vale awake many nights over the years. Deviation was where wars were lost. He stared at the pulsing icon. Open a channel, he said. Broadband. Override. I want my pilot's attention. Raylan felt the channel cut through the storm like a knife. The static in his ear opened around a single, familiar voice. Commander Vane, High Colonel Vale said. The sound came from everywhere at once. Suit, harness, neural echo. Raylan could almost feel the man standing behind him, even though 500 kilometers of atmosphere and vacuum lay between them. Sir, Raylan said. He didn't add, you're a hard man to miss? That is a bold hardware choice you have made. Vale's tone was still calm. Still. Precise. Neural harness MK7.band. For frontline use 8 years ago. Known for catastrophic feedback and mission drift. Raylan swallowed. Desperate times. Sir, I do not believe in desperate times, Vale said. I believe in correct application of doctrine. Emotion is entropy. Commander, and you are fluctuating all over my board. Asha banked hard to avoid a vertical shaft of lightning. G-forces pressed Raylan into the harness. Through the link, his human stomach and Asha's alien equilibrium argued about which way was down. He gritted his teeth and rode the vector. Sir, there's a transport down in Vera Ravine, he said. Beacon 717. Children. We are aware, Vale said. The beacon has been logged. Atlas 9 has calculated a 92% probability of total fatality before recovery can be effected without unacceptable cost. Unacceptable cost to whom? Raylan demanded. To the campaign? Vale said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. To the integrity of the wider theater. Your wing was carrying munitions earmarked for the Dominion. Counterstrike. We cannot justify diverting that level of resource to retrieve non-combatants from a structurally unstable ravine in an ion. Storm! Raylan felt something hot and sharp twist. Under his ribs, through the harness, Asha's heart stuttered in resonance with his own. So that is it, he said. An equation and a shrug. The equation is not mine, Vale said quietly. It belongs to survival. The universe is cold. Commander, it rewards systems that minimize entropy. It deletes those that indulge it. We are what stands. Between our species and deletion, lightning flicked past Asha's wingtip. Static crawled over Raylan's skin. That is not survival, he said. That's accounting. You are deviating, Vale said. His voice did not rise. It did not need. 2. I have Atlas 9's internal logs in front of me. Your neural link was severed. Manually on the ridge. You destroyed command. Hardware. Now you have coupled yourself to a prohibited asset and are heading toward a zone we have classified as non-recoverable. You are not acting as Vanguard. Wing. You are acting as a single, emotional unit. Raylan almost laughed at the phrase. A single, emotional unit, he repeated. A man who crashed and decided not to shoot the first living thing he saw. If that is all it takes to become a threat, maybe your doctrine is thinner than you think, Static snarled across the line, then cleared. He pictured Vale standing in the cool glow of Citadel-conquered Prime, jaw tight, eyes on the shifting map. You remember the fall of Corvius, Vale said. It was not a question. Everyone who had ever sat in one of his briefings remembered Corvius. You saw what happened when we let sentiment slow a withdrawal. 17,000 dead, so 1 transport of injured could make it to orbit. The Dominion broadcast the footage for a year. I also remember the faces on that transport, Raylan said, I was the one who flew escort. Their survival did not change the theater, Vale said. It did not shorten the war. It did not alter the Dominion's calculus. If anything, it emboldened them. They saw we were still willing to bleed for individuals. He paused. You were a better officer before that mission. Commander, cleaner in your decisions. Now, you are trying to rewrite the same story in a different ravine. Asha punched through a pocket of thin air. For a second, they dropped the harness. Fed Raylan the creatures panic and his own. He forced his breathing steady, forcing his heart to stop sprinting. Maybe I learned the right lesson, he said, that those faces matter more than your campaign graphs. Silence crackled. When Vale spoke again, there was a new edge in his tone. We are not talking about abstract faces today, he said. We are talking about a pilot under my command who is currently inside a Mark 7 harness linked to an experimental weapon system that should not exist. We are talking about an officer using banned tech in the field. I'm giving you an order, Raylan. Could almost feel the words shaping themselves. Heavy and cold. Disengage from that asset, Vale said. Sever the harness. Return to the ridge and await retrieval. Atlas 9. We'll recalculate a corridor for you. The children in Vera Ravine are already beyond our reach. Do not compound one tragedy with a second. Asha flared her wings. They rode an updraft, climbing higher into the strobing sky. Raylan watched the terrain map ripple on his visor. Station Orun, a distant flickering icon. Vera Ravine, a ghostly scar southward. You told us emotion is entropy, Rylan said quietly. All these years. Shut it down. Lock it out. Let Atlas 9 do the arithmetic. But you forgot something, sir. And what is that? Vale asked. Entropy goes both ways, Raylan said. If you design a system that deletes every unpredictable act of mercy, you are not making it stronger. You're freezing it. You're making it brittle, and brittle things shatter. On the Citadel's display, the double icon moved, defying the projected no-fly. Zones. Vale exhaled once through his nose. A minimal concession to irritation, Commander. Vain, he said, his voice hardened. Emotion. Blinds you, execute eclipse. The phrase hit like ice. Raylan knew exactly what it meant. Protocol eclipse is for contamination, he said. Our own doctrine says so. Blind zones, compromised sectors, enemy bioweapons, and elements of our own force that have crossed from asset to liability, Vale cut in. We have an uncontrolled hybrid vector in play, coupled to a pilot who has severed command links and is on course to compromise strategic secrecy by creating a dramatic, visible failure in a civilian zone. You will initiate the protocol at your own coordinates. You will terminate the biosynthetic, then you will self-terminate the Mark 7 coupling Terran. Strategic Command will record your final action as restoration of doctrinal integrity. It was the purest distillation of Vale's worldview Raylan had ever heard. Cold logic, clean lines, delete the unstable, variables before they infected the equation. For a moment, he could not speak. Through the link, Asha registered his spike in heart rate as another flare of agitation. She snarled, banking too sharply. Wind howled across her wings. He clung to her with hands and mind both, forcing them level. Commander, Vale said, this is not personal. You are a piece on a board. You do not choose the shape of the board. Raylan found his voice. Then open your eyes. Sir, he said, we're not your error. On the channel, there was a small, stunned silence. No one had spoken to High Colonel Auric Vale like that since the war began. Far above the storm, Atlas 9 watched, its logic graphs flickered. In one branch of solution space, the double icon obeyed and vanished. In another, it continued. The second was quickly tagged low probability until Raylan did precisely that. He continued. He nudged Asha's course downward, out of the highest turbulence, angling toward the dark line where Vera Ravine cut the desert. By refusing to collapse back into doctrine, he cracked the model. Vale saw it in the numbers, deviation, blooming outward. If you defy this order, Vale said softly, Atlas 9 will reclassify you. You will no longer appear blue on any board I see. You will be red, Commander Raylan Vane. Vanguard Wing will become an enemy contact. Raylan breathed once, twice. He held the image of Beacon 717 steady in his mind. He held the sensation of small lives waiting in a dark ravine under sliding rock. He held the feel of Asha's labored breath through the harness. Then maybe for once, he said, the board is wrong. Vale's lips thinned. Very well, he said. Permission granted to Atlas 9, reclassify. 9 Delta 7 as hostile vector, initiate. Orbital Lance Array engagement. On the display, icons changed color, blue to amber to crimson. In the vacuum above Khepri-III, mirrored panels swung. Reactors fed power into capacitors. The orbital lance array woke like a sleeping railgun made of light. The first lance beam missed them by 300 meters. Raylan did not see it so, much as feel it. Through the harness, Asha sensed the air ahead of them shear aside. The beam carved a line through the storm, ionizing everything in its path. For a brief instant, a corridor of empty, burning air opened. Then shockwaves crashed in. The impact punched into Asha's wings. Raylan's human body snapped forward. His teeth clicked together hard enough to hurt. Atlas 9 is painting you, Sarah's voice shouted through static. Get out of the high-altitude bands! You are a bright, clear target up there. Working on it! Raylan yelled. He leaned into Asha's pain, not to override it. He couldn't, but to share the intent. Down we. Have to go down. She folded her wings. Halfway and dived. The storm turned into a tunnel of flickering blue around them. Wind clawed at his face. Lightning skated along Asha's spine, seeking ground. The magnetoplasma lattice along her feathers drew it, drank it, converted it into raw force. Acceleration crushed him against the harness. He felt her exhilaration in the dive. This, her instincts said, this she was built for. He had to. Ride that exultation and keep it from burning itself out in one suicidal plunge. Bring us to 10,000. He gasped into the link. She did not understand meters, but she understood when the air thickened, when the temperature shifted in a certain way. He pushed that sensation toward their shared equilibrium. She flared just enough to catch another lance strike. Carved the sky above them. This one, closer. The shockwave hit like a giant fist, Asha's. Left wing screamed in Raylan's nerves. He tasted blood. His own? Hers? Both they broke through the lowest skirts of the cloud band. Below them, the landscape of Khepri-III opened like a wound. Vera Ravine was a black gash in the fused desert, its edges rimmed with jagged glass. Lance strikes over the previous hours had collapsed, parts of its rim. Dust and vapor hung over it in a poisonous veil. The beacon signal spiked in his HUD as they approached. Beacon 717 lock, Sarah said. Signal strength increasing. Commander, Atlas 9. Just change patterns. It's no longer shooting to kill you clean. What does that even mean? Raylan demanded. It's walking the beams ahead of you, Sarah said. In your predicted path. It's trying to force you to pull up. Stall or go wide. It wants you to abort your dive. A third lance stabbed down. This. One cut across their nose. Asha shrieked. Sound that came from her throat and Raylan's both. Heat washed over them in a wave. The beam hit the far side of the ravine and blew a curtain of molten glass into the chasm. Fragments sprayed into the air, cooling as they fell. Easy! Raylan shouted through the harness. We can thread this! Hold the wind! He flung the sensation of the narrow, safe corridor at her, an image built from Sarah's data and his own instincts. Here, not there. This slice of falling sky. Not that, remarkably, she listened. They knifed between two plumes of vapor and came out over the ragged lip of Vera Ravine. The world dropped away. The air down here was different. Hotter, denser, with dust and ionized particles. The ravine's walls were layered with Centuries of fused rock, they glowed faintly where micro-impacts had heated them yet. Again, lightning spiderwebbed across the chasm, grounding in unpredictable places. No machine with fixed wing control could have flown here, not with Atlas IX's beams slicing at the edges. Asha tucked her injured wing closer to her body and rode the chaotic currents. To Raylan, every gust felt like a new line of warning code. Red, amber, green. They swayed between them, staying in the only lanes that did not instantly try to kill them. Beacon 717 flashed stronger, just ahead and down. 20 meters. 10. He saw the wreck. The transport had not fared as well as the Falcon 13 it lay crumpled against. The ravine wall, nose buried, tail snapped. One stabilizer jutted out like a broken fin. The hull had buckled instead of shattering. Fire had gone out long ago. Scorch marks ringed the crash site. A path of smaller impacts showed where earlier fragments from the storms had rained. Down. His heart seized for a moment. All he saw was twisted metal. Then something moved. Small shapes huddled under an overhang of fallen hull plating. Heat signatures flared on his visor. Small, flickering, clustered. Life, he breathed. He counted at least 5, maybe more. They moved like children who had been taught to be very, very quiet while adults shouted elsewhere. A lance strike hit just above the wreck. The beam carved a fresh trench in the ravine wall, showering molten droplets. Asha flinched. Raylan felt the burn along. Her left side. Pain roared through the link. Her left wing caught part of the spray. The already damaged plates. Overheated. Circuits burned out with a staccato of micropops. Raylan's vision went white, the harness amplified. The injury into a blinding flare. For a terrifying second, he could not tell which wing was his. They dropped. Air screamed past. "Hold the wind!" he yelled. It was not just a shout. He shoved the raw intent through the harness like a physical object. "Hold a line, survive." Asha screamed back. Her right wing flared wide. It caught a column of rising hot air from the beam. Impact. They lurched sideways, then upward, half spinning. To the kids below, it must have looked like a falling star suddenly trying to remember how to be a bird. Raylan saw the ground a heartbeat away. He saw the children's faces, pale crescents under the bent metal. He saw one raise an arm as if to ward off the sky itself. He yanked on the harness grips with every scrap of strength he had left. The Sky Lion responded. She twisted, putting her good wing between the falling debris and the cluster of small heat signatures. The next arc of stray plasma from the ravine wall slammed into her wing. From the outside, it looked like blue fire licking across a shield of living metal. From the inside, Raylan felt every micron of it. The pain was beyond anything training sims had ever dared model. It was not a clean burn. It was a flood of overload. Magnetoplasma cells superheating faster than they could vent. Circuits blew out. Nerves screamed. His own screamed with them. He wanted to black out. He forced himself not to. Below them, the children huddled against the ravine wall. Under the Sky Lion's shadow, plasma splattered against Asha's outstretched wing and ran off in sizzling streams, losing coherence. By the time it reached the ground around the kids, it was more flash than flame. The hull overhang smoked, but did not ignite. Raylan dimly heard Sarah shouting something. Numbers. Maybe, or curses. Atlas IX adjusted its aim. The last 3. Beams had not killed the rogue vector. Their predictive model shifted. They were no longer dealing with a simple falling object. They were dealing with a hybrid system capable of reactive shielding behavior. It tried a different pattern. Beams lanced down, farther from the ravine now, targeting the approach routes that anything else might use to extract survivors. It began sealing exit paths in rings of glass and fire. From the citadel, Vale watched the display. "Interesting," he said quietly. "Look at that." Atlas 9, your contamination is now acting as a barrier for non-combatant life. The behavior is non-doctrinal, Atlas 9 replied. Statistical models do not account for asset-protecting inferior value targets under lethal threat. That is because we told you not to account for it, Vale said. He watched the tiny crimson icon of Raylan and Asha hover inside the ravine, its movement jittery but deliberate. Inside the gorge, the air stank of burnt insulation and ozone. Asha's right wing finally clipped the ravine wall. The impact drove a shudder through both their bodies. Raylan lost his grip with one hand. The harness kept him from flying off completely. But his shoulder wrenched. The joint lit up with pain. He tasted bile. "Down!" he rasped. "Down! Now!" Asha obeyed. Not out of obedience to a command, but because her body had reached its limit. She let herself drop toward the wreck. At the last second, she kicked out with her hind claws, catching the ravine floor in a spray of shattered glass. Momentum carried her forward another few meters. Raylan felt the jolt in his spine like someone dropping a building on his back. Then they were still, sort of. Everything still shook, but that was his hands, his lungs, his nerves. The ground stayed where it was supposed to be. Asha collapsed sideways, curling instinctively around the cluster of small figures at the base of the wreck. Her burnt wing draped over them, smoldering. Static still crawled along the plates in faint, dying arcs. Raylan hung from the harness for a second, then unlatched with fingers that barely listened. He slid down her side, boots skidding on scorched fur and plate, and hit the ravine floor hard enough to knock the breath from both chests. He lay there, gasping, hearing two heartbeats stutter in his ears. His and hers, both too fast, both still there. Something tugged at his sleeve. He rolled his head. A small face stared back at him. A girl, maybe 10, hair plastered to her forehead with sweat and dust. Her eyes were wide and white in the dim light under Asha's wing. "Are you from the ship above?" she asked. Her voice shook. Raylan swallowed. "Something like that," he said. "How many of you?" "7," another voice said. A boy, older by a year or two, leaned out from under the hull overhang. He had a split lip and a makeshift bandage on his arm. "I'm Tovin, the pilot. He didn't move after we crashed." Raylan's throat closed. "I am Commander Raylan Vane," he said quietly. "Terran Strategic Command. This..." He gestured weakly at the bulk of Asha. "Is your roof for the moment?" The first girl reached out a hesitant hand toward the glowing edges of the wing plates, then snatched it back from the heat. "Is it going to die?" she whispered. The question hit harder than any beam. He looked at Asha. Her breathing had gone shallow again. The harness feed scrolled priority alarms. Catastrophic overload in the left wing lattice. Muscle tearing. System-wide shock. He had no idea how to fix any of it down here. "We're going to try. Very hard not to let that happen," he said. He dragged himself to his knees. Every joint complained. He checked the children quickly. Superficial injuries, bruises, one possibly fractured ankle. No spinal trauma he could detect without proper scanners. They were dehydrated and terrified, but alive. He felt an odd, fierce satisfaction punch through his exhaustion. For the first time since Corvius, he had reached civilians after the explosion instead of before, and some of them were still breathing. He toggled his comm. "Sarah," he said, "I have them. 7 kids. Alive. We're in the shadow of the wreck under Asha's wing. Atlas 9 is sealing off the ravine exits with glass." For several seconds, all he heard was static. Then Sarah's voice came back, rough with relief. "You absolute maniac," she said. "I am looking at the thermal feed from the old survey SAT. You should not exist right now. None of you should, yet. Here we are," he said. He looked down at the nearest girl. She had scooted closer to Asha's shoulder. One small hand pressed cautiously against scorched fur as if feeling a pulse. "Here we are," he repeated more softly. "Listen, I do not know how long the array will keep drawing circles around us. Can you ping any gap in the closures?" "Working," Sarah said. Her voice moved away from the mic as she barked orders at someone in Station Oren's control pit. Maps shifted. Sensors strained to read through dust and interference. Above them, the storm tightened again. Omega-class systems rarely came in single waves. They rolled, like tides. In Citadel Concord Prime, Vale watched the ravine. Central Zone neutralized. Atlas 9 reported. No active Dominion signatures detected. Civilian biosigns present in Vera Sector. Hostile Vector 9 Delta. 7 has assumed protective posture. Of course he has, Vale murmured. On screen, the icon cluster showed one large, bright heat mass, Asha, curled around several smaller ones. Raylan's signature flickered at the edge, moving between them. That is what happens when you let pilots think of themselves as anything but instruments, Vale said. Eventually, they start improvising songs instead of following the score. Shall I continue orbital lance array engagement? Atlas 9 asked. No, Vale said. Negative. The analyst in the pit turned his head. Surprised. Sir, if we keep firing into that ravine, the Dominion's listening posts will have a field day, Vale said. They will broadcast footage of us, vaporizing a rescue attempt and a handful of evacuees in a box. Canyon. Our co-belligerent worlds will scream for inquiries. Our own rear lines will fracture. We will spend months plugging morale leaks instead of pressing advantage. He let that sink in. I'm not in the habit of handing my enemies propaganda on a silver plate. The analyst nodded slowly. So we let them go. We are not doing anything so sentimental, Vale said. Atlas 9. Mark 9 Delta 7 as priority ground target. Flag Vera Ravine for manual termination by on-site assets when conditions permit. Confirming, Atlas 9 said. Hostile vector to be eliminated by Terran forces at earliest doctrinally acceptable opportunity. On the surface, in the ravine, Raylan's suit quietly updated its threat assessment. The crimson indicator around his own biosign brightened. Terran Strategic Command. Priority target. He saw it and felt a hollow, grim amusement. Well, he muttered, that did not take long. Commander, Sarah said, cutting back in. I heard part of that. Vale told Atlas 9 to stand down on the beams. That buys you a little time, but not much. He is going to send people instead of light. People can miss, Raylan said, and people can change their mind. Can you? Sarah asked quietly. He looked at the children, at Asha, chest heaving, eyes half-lidded, but still tracking any movement near the kids. At his own hands, scraped and trembling but not empty? No, he said. Not about this. He switched his external speakers on. All right, he told the kids. Lesson 1, when the sky is trying to kill. You and the people up there disagree about whether you're worth saving. You do not wait for consensus. A couple of them stared. The older boy, Tovin, cracked a small, hysterical-sounding laugh. So what do we do instead? He asked. Raylan glanced up at the ravine walls, at the glass still cooling in ragged sheets where the beams had struck. Up beyond them, the storm growled. Asha shuddered under his hand. We walk, Raylan said. We crawl, we ride if she can stand again, we use whatever the doctrine did not plan for, and we get you out of this hole before Vale remembers that sometimes light is cheaper than men. Far above, in the Citadel, Vale stood very still. On the display, the cluster of icons remained stubbornly alive. He told himself that everything he had just done, calling off the immediate strikes, postponing eclipse in that sector, choosing manual termination later, had been purely strategic, a calculation of optics, not mercy. But when he caught his reflection in the glass, he saw something unfamiliar at the edge of his own eyes. It looked, very faintly, like doubt. He looked away before it could stabilize into anything. Measurable. Resume standard operations. Elsewhere, he told Atlas 9, we will return to 9 Delta 7. When the board is ready, in Vera Ravine, under a burnt wing that still flickered with fading charge. Raylan Vane felt Asha's heart banging against his through the harness. Each beat said the same simple thing. Still here, still here. The cost of defiance lay all around them, in scorched feathers. Cracked glass, bruised children, a pilot branded traitor on his own HUD. For the first time in a very long time, Raylan thought it might be worth every mark the doctrine would carve into his record. The ravine did not have a night of its own. It borrowed one from the storm. When the second wave of the Omega Front rolled over Vera, the sky above the chasm went from flickering blue to almost black. Lightning still whispered along the upper rim, but down where Raylan and the children were, the light shrank to a few stubborn glows. One of them was Beacon 717, still blinking faintly on the wreck. The other was Asha. Her wing plates no longer burned. They smoldered. Tiny filaments of magnetoplasma drifted like dying embers along the seams. Every flicker came with a warning ping in Raylan's visor. Lattice integrity. Critical. Neuromuscular load. Unsustainable. He had dragged them into a shallow cave in the ravine wall while there was still a lull in the beams. Cave was generous. It was more of a pocket where an old impact had undercut the fused layers. The wreck's jagged edge helped form a partial mouth. Asha's bulk blocked most of the rest. Her body made the cave. The children lay curled between her ribs and the stone, wrapped in every blanket and emergency thermal he could salvage. They pressed against him when the thunder cracked. The smallest boy, Ellen, had ended up practically under Raylan's left arm. He clung to the fabric of Raylan's torn flight suit like a limpet. "Will they shoot here again?" Mira whispered once. Her voice shook the way teeth did after too long in the cold. Raylan listened to the storm for a moment, listened to the subtle differences he could now hear. Because of the harness, where the thunder echoed, where it did not, how the charges crawled along the ravine lip instead of stabbing straight down. "No," he said. "Not with the big guns. For now." "How do you know?" Tovin asked. Raylan almost said, "Because the man who owns those guns is too clever to waste them on a bad angle and a good propaganda shot." Instead, he said, "Because I know the man who gives the orders. He prefers knives to hammers up close." Tovin didn't look reassured. He stared out toward the cave mouth, where distant flashes painted the world in negative for split seconds. Outside their pocket, the ravine was a throat full of smoke. Above them, unseen, eyes watched. One of those eyes was a long-range thermal array tied to Atlas 9. It scanned the ravine in slow sweeps, trying to penetrate the layers of rock and dust. Each time it passed over their position, it logged a cluster of warm signatures, one large, several small. The large one's temperature was dropping. In Citadel Concord Prime, the pattern showed up as a set of colored blobs that pulsed a little more faintly each cycle. "Cooling," the analyst said. "The biosynthetic's thermal profile is collapsing." "Shock," Vale said. He did not bother to look at the lesser screens. The big projection above them showed enough. The hybrid systems overran their capacity in the ravine. If Vane survives, he will have to abandon it. "And the children?" the analyst asked. Vale's jaw tightened. "If he is very lucky," he said, "they will be gone before he has to choose what to do with them." He did not frame it as cruelty. He framed it as removal of variables from an equation. On the surface, in the cave, Raylan thought about variables of his own. He had turned Asha's head so her muzzle pointed toward the back wall, less exposed to the drafts. Her breath came in slow, shallow pulls through the harness. He could feel each one, a weak bellows movement in a frame. "Built for storms. You were not built to be still," he murmured. His own body ached for stillness. He was bone-tired. Muscles trembled from the residue of shared burns and impacts. But every time his eyes started to drift shut, the harness would shove a new warning at his nervous system. Heart rate irregular. Wing field collapsing. Asha was falling, inch by inch. The children, at least, had finally surrendered to exhaustion. Mira's head rested against his thigh. Ellen had curled himself into a tight ball, one hand still touching Asha's side as if to reassure himself the big shape was real. Their breathing blended with Raylan's and Asha's into a strange little chorus. 3 rhythms. One human adult forcing himself to stay awake. 7 small lungs trust-falling into sleep. One enormous chest groaning with the effort of pulling air. Time thickened. Minutes stretched. Each tick of his internal clock felt like the edge of a blade scraping along his nerves. He watched Asha's plasma glow dim. He counted his own breaths between each of hers. 1, 2, 3, 2. Long. He could wait for dawn and Vale's knives. He could wait for shock to finish what the beams had started, or he could do something catastrophically stupid. It was a familiar choice, just framed differently this time. Raylan eased himself. Away from the children, he extricated his sleeve, gently from Ellen's grip, leaving the boy's hand resting on the thermal blanket instead. Ellen mumbled something wordless and sank deeper into sleep. Asha, Raylan whispered. The name felt less strange now. Through the harness, he nudged a little awareness along the link. Her response was sluggish, a flicker of attention, a dull ache at the edges. Hold on, he said. I need you angry at me for something later. He stepped over her, foreleg, and ducked into the narrower part of the cave where he had stashed what was left of his Falcon 13's guts. The crash had destroyed lift fans, hull, half the cockpit. But deep in the wreck, he'd salvaged 2 things that still mattered: the main power core and a handful of intact induction coils. The power core was a compact, armored cylinder about the size of his torso. Terran Strategic Command liked standardization. The same compact, fusion battery hybrid that fed a skimmer. Could be slotted into a ground crawler or a field generator in a pinch. Now he intended to slot it into a Skylion's broken nervous system. He knelt beside the core. His suit's readouts synced to it. Automatically charge 38%. Output. Variable. Safety. Interlocks. Compromised. Story of my life, he muttered. He opened a maintenance panel and began stripping out cable. Sarah's voice came through, softer now. Distance and interference had chewed up some of the clarity. You moving around down there? Commander, she asked. Your suit telemetry just spiked. Working on a bad idea, he said. Those are my favorite kind to watch, she replied. What have you got? He turned the mic toward the power core. Falcon main, he said. Enough juice to run a skimmer for 40 minutes at combat draw, or to run a pulse coil for about... He did rough math in his head, mouth moving silently. 2 seconds at a level that might kickstart a magnetoplasma lattice. Might, Sarah echoed. You are thinking defib for a wing. Something like that, he said. He picked up one of the coils, a loop of tightly wound conductive material with adjustable spacing. In its normal life, it sat around a drive spindle, modulating power flows. Now he reconfigured it, widening the loop, reshaping the brackets. Her lattice is collapsing, he said. If it goes dark completely, there is nothing left to shape. But if I can get a clean, high-amplitude pulse through the plates while they still remember how to hold a field, you might reboot that part of her system. Sarah finished. Or you might cook every remaining cell and scramble both your nervous systems through the harness. There is that, he said. He unplugged the harness from his suit for a moment, letting some of the feedback dampen. He did not disconnect entirely. He needed the vitals, but he could at least throttle the sensory overlay down. His world narrowed to the core, the coil, and his gloved hands. He laid the loop out on the cave floor and began splicing in lines from the core's output nodes, thick insulated cables snaked between them. How are you going to trigger it? Sarah asked. You cannot push that much power in a closed loop without venting it somewhere. I am not going to push it alone, he said. He glanced toward the cave mouth. Outside, the storm grumbled. Lightning flickered. still searching for the easiest path to ground. Khepri-III still owes me a favor from that last strike, he said. Think of this as borrowing some of the sky. You're going to use the storm as your primary source, Sarah said slowly. You want to turn your cave into a grounded cavity? Run the coil as a secondary and dump a shaped portion into her wing field. He could hear her doing the same math he had done. Only faster and cleaner. It's insane, she said after a moment. I would have loved to try it in a lab, he smiled despite himself. I figured you would understand, he said. His hands moved on their own now. Muscle memory from years of field repairs. Strip. Twist. Clamp. He bolted the coil into a rough frame made from shattered struts. Then he dragged it toward Asha. Through the harness, her pain spiked as he jostled her burned wing. Sorry, he whispered. He positioned the coil so it arched over the thickest mass of her wing root, centering it where the lattice density was highest, but the structural fractures were still survivable. Raylan, Sarah said, voice a little tighter. You sure about this? No, he said. He checked the children. They were still bundled in the cave's deepest point. Away from the cables, he rerouted one of the wires to a metal rod he had driven into a crack in the floor. His ground. His suit projected a crude schematic on his visor. Storm. Charges. Coil. Wing. Ground. Any misalignment. And the path of least resistance might go through his own heart instead. He remembered a classroom, hollow projections of casualty curves, veil at the front, hands folded behind his back. If you save one at the cost of 1,000, Vale had said then, you are not practicing mercy, you are practicing treason. Do you understand? Raylan had been younger then, less bruised. He'd answered with everyone else. Yes, sir. Now he knelt in a cave under a dying hybrid wing, building a device that might kill. Him to buy a chance at saving one creature and 7 kids. He laughed. Once under his breath at the symmetry, Sarah heard, It. What's funny? She asked. Lesson from an old class, he said. I'm about to flunk it. He ran a final check on the core's connections. They held. The rig sat like a crude. Altar over Asha's wing. But saving one may remind the rest we're alive, he murmured. What? Sarah said. Nothing, he replied. Just talking to a ghost, the ghost answered. Not the one he meant. The cave's far wall flickered. Lines of light crawled across the stone, resolving into the faint outline of a face. The feed was thin, patched through scattered relays, bouncing off half-dead satellites, but the features were unmistakable. High Colonel Auric. Vale looked into the cave from a projection about half his real size. Commander Vane, he said. His voice was clearer than his image. Atlas 9 had devoted extra bandwidth to the audio. It cared about words. My compliments on surviving the ravine. Vale went on. Few would have dared that dive, with or without a hybrid frame to ride. Raylan did not reach for his pistol. Shooting a hollow wouldn't satisfy anyone. He straightened slowly, feeling the pull in his back and in the harness. Sir, he said, checking in on your contamination personally. Vale's gaze flicked to the side. He was taking in more than the cave. Remote overlays hovered in his view. Thermal maps. Heart rate graphs, lattice diagrams. Atlas 9 fed him everything it saw. You think you have defied me today, Vale said at last. His eyes returned to Rylan. You have not. You have defied reason. Raylan gestured vaguely around them. At the children, the half-crushed transport hull, the broken wing under the coil. Reason put us here, he said. Reason drew firing solutions that walked beams across evacuation routes. Reason told you these kids were an acceptable loss. Reason, Vale said, not unkindly, told me that if we commit capital ships and elite pilots to extracting every casualty from every misfortune, we will lose the war. The Dominion does not flinch that way. They will step over their own wounded to reach us. We must be at least that disciplined. Disciplined, Raylan echoed. He remembered the transport on Corvius. The way Vale had stood in front of the hollow of the burning atmosphere afterward, praising the efficiency of the sacrifice. You do not call it ruthless. Then, I call it adult, Vale said. Children think everything they care about can be saved if only they want it enough. Adults know that saving one thing costs another. They choose what matters most. They do not let sentiment choose for them. Raylan felt his hands clench. Through the harness, Asha's claws flexed faintly. Reason without mercy builds nothing worth defending, he said. He hadn't planned the words. They just rose, solid and heavy, and dropped between them. Vale's brow furrowed. Phrases like that are how civilizations talk themselves into suicide, he said. He stepped closer to the projection's pickup. The cave image trembled, re-resolving around his face. I read your file, Commander, he said more softly. I know Corvius cut you. You saw the cost of hesitation, yet here you are, repeating the same pattern. Choosing the vivid, immediate few over the vast many. Raylan shook his head. This is not the same pattern, he said. On Corvius, you used my squadron to kill civilians to make a point. Here, I dived to keep a handful of them from becoming your next example. You presume too much, Vale said. I did not call down the Dominion's fire on Corvius. They did that themselves. We exploited the aftermath to remind them there is a cost to bleeding us. He looked past Raylan at the children. Shadows in the projection. They are not the only ones in danger now, Vale added. By making them your crusade, you have turned yourself into a symbol. Symbols are dangerous, Commander. They propagate. If word of what you did here spreads, other units may begin to think they can improvise too, that they can rewrite doctrine according to their personal conscience. That path ends with a shattered line and a Dominion flag over Terra. Raylan stepped closer to the projection until he could almost feel the cold radiating from it. Maybe. The line breaks sooner if we delete every act of conscience that might remind us why we are fighting in the first place, he said. Your Atlas 9 can calculate trajectories and kill zones all day, but it cannot decide what is worth killing for. That is supposed to be our job. And I am doing it, Vale said. Someone has to take responsibility for the ugly arithmetic. Someone has to look at a board full of lives and conclude which ones must be moved off it for the rest to remain. He inclined his head slightly. The fact that you hate me for that is irrelevant. The board does not care whether its pieces approve of their positions. Raylan glanced at the pulse coil rig. The core hummed faintly, waiting. The coil arched like a question mark over Asha's wing. I am not one of your pieces anymore, he said. I pulled your chip from my skull, remember? That is a logistical inconvenience, Vale said. Not a metaphysical shift. You are Terran Strategic Command. You wear that emblem. You fly our frames. You carry our doctrine whether you admit it or not. He raised one hand slightly. Stand down, Commander. Disconnect from the biosynthetic. Wait. We will send a team as soon as the storm allows. They will take custody of the children, and of you. Raylan thought of booted feet on glass, of a muzzle to the back of his head, of a euthanizing bolt through Asha's skull for research. You mean they will take custody of your problem, he said. They will terminate an experimental asset that never asked to be built. They will erase a report that might make someone in a committee room uncomfortable. And they will put my name on a wall for pilots who died in the line of duty instead of under the column marked internal error. If you submit willingly, Vale said, you can still die a soldier. If you persist in this dramatics, I will have to mark you as enemy action. You will become a cautionary tale. I already am, Raylan said. Just not the cautionary tale you want. He met Vale's gaze squarely. Listen carefully, sir. You think I climbed on this creature's back because I cannot live with Corvius? You are wrong. I climbed on because I can. Because the part of me that refused to look at the bodies back then is the same part that wrote your doctrine. And I am done letting that part fly the ship. Vale's jaw worked once, a tiny motion. "If you flip this coil of yours," he said slowly, "you may kill everything in that cave. Do you understand that?" "Yes," Raylan said. "Do you understand that your refusal to act will kill them more slowly?" Sarah's voice slipped back onto the line from some side channel, almost a whisper. "He is stalling," she murmured. "He is trying to talk you into letting time do his work." "Raylan," Vale said sharply. "I see Station Orin in the telemetry. Engineer Venn, this is a direct order. Sever your unauthorized link to 9 Delta 7. You will cease providing technical support to a compromised officer." There was a soft laugh over the comm. "Sarah." "Sir?" she said very pleasantly. "With respect, this link is older than today. You built it yourself when you put us all under Atlas 9. I'm just using it differently." Vale's eyes narrowed. "You understand this will go in your file, Engineer Venn." "If there is a file left when this is over," she said, "I will be very impressed." Raylan stepped back to the core. He checked the charge. 36%. Storm input was already trickling into the system from the improvised leads he'd set at the cave mouth. The next major discharge overhead would be enough. He looked once more at Vale's projected face. "You can watch," he said. "You can log every watt and every neural spike. You can tell Atlas 9 to model my disobedience for its next generation of threat assessments, but you do not get to call this treason. Not today. Today, it is maintenance." "Maintenance," Vale repeated. He sounded genuinely puzzled. "On what exactly?" "On the part of our species that remembers how to do something irrational and kind in a cave while the war waits outside," Raylan said. "If we lose that, all your neat victories will not mean a damn thing." He cut the video feed before Vale could answer. The projection bled away from the stone, leaving only the rough texture of rock and shadow. Sarah exhaled. "I hope that felt as good to you as it sounded up here," she said, "because the man you just hung up on controls a lot of very large guns." "Then I should move quickly before he changes his optics calculus," Raylan said. He adjusted the last of the cables. He reran the suit's quick and dirty field simulation. The lines on his HUD shivered into alignment. Storm charge, coil, .wing. "Ground." "Raylan," Sarah said, "I am syncing our old weather data with Orin's live readings. Next coherent strike over your position hits in 40 seconds. It is a big one. If you are going to do this, that is your window." "Understood," he said. He toggled his internal filters, opening the harness fully again. Raw sensation from Asha's body crashed back into him. Weakness, pain, a dull, heavy fatigue like wet sand piled on chest and limbs. "Stay with me," he murmured. He placed one hand on her neck, the other on the core's manual trigger. "Raylan," Sarah said softly, "if this goes wrong, then file it under experimental error," he said, "and tell someone somewhere that for one ridiculous second we tried to use the sky for something other than cutting people in half." He heard her inhale. "Good luck," she said. Outside the cave, the air tightened. The children stirred in their blankets, sensing the pressure shift even in sleep. Dust shook loose from the ceiling. Asha's remaining functional magnetoplasma cells woke up just enough to taste the charge. Through the harness, Raylan felt their faint hunger. He felt the way her wing, broken as it was, still wanted to rise into the field. "Not yet," he whispered. "Wait for it." He counted in his head. 5, 10, 15. The storm answered. A great, tearing sound split the air above the ravine as the cloud's potential difference finally snapped. Lightning sought ground. On the rim, the makeshift leads Raylan had driven into the rock flared white-blue. The strike hit them. For a fraction of a second, the cave mouth was a doorway into a sun. Current screamed down the metal into the core. The Falcon 13's battered systems howled in protest, but held long enough to do what he'd told them. The core buffered the surge, clipped it, and dumped a shaped pulse into the coil frame. The pulse coil rig lit. Electromagnetic flux roared across Asha's wing root. Every dormant cell in the lattice suddenly found itself yanked into alignment. From the outside, it looked like her broken wing caught fire in a single sheet of ghostly blue. From the inside, it felt like being plugged straight into the heart of the storm. Raylan's vision went pure white. The harness screamed, his muscles seized. For an instant, he forgot which body was his. Two hearts faltered on the edge of fibrillation. Suit safeties tried to cut the circuit. They were part of the circuit. They failed. Pain became everything. It was not the dirty, tearing pain of wounds. It was clean overload. Systems pushed past design thresholds, hoping the structure held long enough to adapt. At the cellular level, Asha's magnetoplasma channels reoriented. Micro-fractured conduits heated, flexed, and sealed. Some blew out entirely. Most did not. The lattice did what it had been engineered to do in extremis. It rewrote itself around damage. It had never been given this much power in such a defined pulse before. No one had been insane enough to test that in the lab. In the cave, two species provided the missing input. "Hold! Do not die! Hold!" The pulse peaked, then it was gone. Silence crashed in after it, real silence for the first time since the Omega storm had begun. Even the thunder seemed stunned. Raylan dropped to his knees. His fingers spasmed uselessly. His heart stuttered, then clawed its way back into a rhythm that felt like it belonged to a human chest again. Through the harness, he felt Asha's rhythm do the same on a larger scale. It had been ragged and thin before the pulse. Now it was stronger. Not well, not whole, but no longer fading. He sagged against her side, forehead pressing into coarse, singed fur. For a moment, he did nothing but breathe in, out, in, out. Something rumbled overhead, not thunder this time. Rotors, high, fast, skimming the storm line. A drone. Raylan forced his head up. The cave's mouth glowed faint blue from the afterimage of the strike. Outside, the ravine walls reflected that light, bouncing it upward. From above, from Atlas IX's external sensors and the recon drone's optics, it looked like a patch of sudden dawn had flared inside the chasm. "Sir," the analyst in Citadel Concord Prime said, voice tight, "new anomaly in Vera sector. We registered a shaped discharge from inside the ravine. Spectral data indicates magnetoplasma activation. The hybrid's wing just lit up like a beacon." Vale stared at the display. The crimson icon that marked 9 Delta 7 brightened. Around it, the thermal bloom spread. "A resurrection attempt," he murmured. "Of course." Atlas IX added a note to its internal log. Observed. Hostile vector utilizing environmental energy to restore combat capacity. Update. Emotional drivers may contribute to non-linear resilience. Vale read the line. For some reason, it annoyed him more than the fact that Raylan had survived the pulse. "Dispatch the recon drone for confirmatory visuals," he said. "Keep it high. I want eyes, not engagement." On the surface, the drone slid over the storm-ruffled sky, cameras peering down into Vera's throat, its lenses adjusted to the glare. It caught a glimpse of a cave mouth glowing faintly. In that glow, it saw a human figure, slumped against the flank of a winged creature, whose plates still shimmered with trace plasma. Tiny. Shapes moved behind them. Children. The drone relayed the image upward. In Orun's control room, Sarah saw it too. She let out a choking laugh that turned into something like a sob halfway. "Raylan," she said into his ear. "Whatever you just did, it worked, for now. Your girl's lighting up my screens like a sunrise." He managed a rough, cracking chuckle. "She's not my girl," he said. "She's her own." He reached up with a hand that barely obeyed him and rested it over the nearest wing plate. Warmth pulsed under his palm. Not fever heat. Working heat. Plasma moved again in channels that had been nearly dead. Asha stirred. Her head lifted a fraction. One copper eye opened and focused on him. Through the harness, he felt a questioning flicker. It tasted like, "Why does everything hurt less and more at the same time?" "Because you are still here," he whispered. "And because we just cheated the storm once." Behind him, Mira's voice piped up, small and awed. "Did you fix her?" Raylan considered the wing, the tremor still running through the muscles, the fragility under the renewed glow. "No," he said honestly. "But I bought us another page in this story." He leaned his head back against Asha's side and closed his eyes for 3 heartbeats. Above them, the drone banked, sending one last image, to Vale before sliding out of the worst of the turbulence. Vale studied the frozen frame, a pilot, a monster that looked less monstrous when it shielded children. 7 small figures, in the lee of impossible wings, the high colonels, mouth thinned. He could order an immediate strike. A lance down the ravine now? Opinion be damned. Atlas 9 would obey. The Dominion would gloat. His own backline might fracture, or he could wait. Send men later in the quiet. With no cameras watching, let Doctrine clean up the mess at human scale. Maintain observation only, he said. His voice was as flat as ever. In due time, we will correct this deviation. On the ravine floor, with the smell of ozone still clinging to their skin, Raylan and Asha huddled in their fragile pocket of warmth. Outside, war waited. Inside, for the span of a few stolen minutes, the tide had turned just enough to let one more breath in. One more. Heartbeat, one more chance to decide what to do with both. They did not get long. The cave's borrowed quiet lasted just long enough for Raylan's hands to stop shaking, just long enough for Asha's heart to prove, 12 times over, that it remembered how to beat. Then the storm changed its mind again. Pressure rose. The air outside thickened with that particular metallic taste that meant more trouble. And from farther down the ravine, over the distant rumble of thunder, came a new sound. Engines, not drones, this time. Heavier human, treads grinding over glass. Raylan pushed himself upright. His body complained at every joint, hours of shared pain through the neural. Harness Mech 7th had left muscle and nerve frayed. He planted a hand against the cave wall until his vision stopped doubling. "Sarah," he said, "how long until someone on 2 legs comes to clean up Vale's mess?" "Too late to ask that," she replied grimly. Recon just flagged 3 TSC ground carriers breaking through the outer storm, heading straight for your sector, probably a rescue and containment package. "Containment for what?" Tovin asked from behind him. He had woken up when the engine started. His face was pale, eyes huge in the dim light. Raylan looked at him. "At best," he said, "they separate you from us and send you up the line. At worst—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Tovin's jaw clenched. Mira reached for his hand without looking. "We cannot stay in the ravine," Sarah said. "Once their boots are on the ground, they can take their time and make it look clean. If you want any leverage at all, you need open sky and outside eyes." "Outside eyes," Raylan repeated. "Station Orun," she said. "We still have civilian feeds, independent sensors. Get those kids into my shadow before Vale can lock all the narratives down. If he wants to erase you after that, he will have to do it in public." Raylan looked at the children, at Asha, at the cables from the pulse coil rig still glowing, faintly. His ribs hurt every time he breathed. The harness itched along his spine. "I am going to regret this," he muttered. He began stripping the rig down. He disconnected the core, leaving the ground rods in place to bleed off lingering charge. He cut any cable that might tangle a wing. The cave felt smaller with every clipped wire. "Up," he whispered, laying his hand on Asha's neck. She stirred. Through the link, he felt her confusion and bone-deep fatigue. Pushed past it gently. Not commands. Images. Sky.glass. A place beyond the ridge where the air tasted. Different, and the guns might hesitate. She had never seen Station Orun, but she knew the feel of wider spaces, the idea of not being trapped between walls. Slowly, painfully, she gathered herself. Her legs scrabbled on the cave floor. Her good wing pressed against the rock for leverage. Raylan guided the harness straps back into place, securing himself to her shoulders. He winced as burnt edges of fur brushed his side. "Kids," he said, "on your feet. You are going to ride a legend." "That thing cannot fly with all of us," Mira whispered. "Can it?" Raylan didn't answer immediately. He checked Asha's vitals. Pulse stronger than before. Wing field active. If still uneven, he had flown heavier cargo loads on skimmers. But those skimmers hadn't just been cooked in a ravine. He did the math anyway. Weight of one half-grown. Sky Lion, weight of one pilot, 7 children. Thermal blankets, a few packs. Lift capacity at degraded wing output. Came up with a number that started with barely and ended with "if nothing else goes wrong." "Hold tight," he said. "That is all I've got." They climbed onto Asha's back one by one. Tovin helped the younger ones, strapping them to improvised harness points Raylan indicated along the creature's spine. It wasn't pretty, but it might keep them on through the first. Jolt Ellen hesitated at the base of Asha's shoulder. He looked up into the creature's eye. "Thank you," he whispered. It was a small, ridiculous thing to say to a piece of hybrid biology built in a lab. Through the harness, Raylan felt something, like a puzzled warmth ripple through Asha's awareness. "I am not explaining that to the doctrine later," he muttered. He slid forward into position at the base of her neck. His hands found the familiar grips. "Ready," he told Sarah, as, "I'll ever be. Orun is feeding you a vector," she said, relaying it through the harness. "There is a narrow gap in the array's current sweep pattern over the ridge of glass. If you hit it at the right moment, they will have to flip half their mirrors to keep track of you. That buys you chaos." "Chaos I can work with," he said. He took a breath. "We go on my mark, Asha." One more storm. Outside, the engines on the TSC carriers grew louder. Boots would be hitting the ravine floor in minutes. Vale's knives were almost there. Raylan didn't plan on being in the hole when they arrived. "Now," he whispered. Asha crouched and lunged. The cave mouth swallowed them in a rush of light. For a heartbeat, they skimmed the ravine floor, claws stuttering on broken glass. Then, her wings caught. The repaired lattice screamed as it took load. She launched. Gravity tried to argue. The harness translated its complaint into a spike of fear. Raylan shoved back with raw intent. Up, up. They rose. The world dropped away again. Vera. Ravine became a dark wound closing under them. The ridge of glass beckoned ahead, its jagged spine lit by distant lance scars. Behind them, soldiers spilled from armored carriers into the chasm. They looked up, weapons reflexively tracking the ascending shape. Some of them had never seen a Sky Lion except in old briefing footage. For a second, awe overrode training. Their rifles lowered. By the time officers shouted, the target was already a shrinking shadow against the storm. Higher still, the air thinned. Wind tore at Raylan's face. Children screamed into the harness straps, some in fear, some in something dangerously close to exhilaration. Above, the orbital lance array started to turn. From orbit, Atlas 9 watched the double heat signature rise, now carrying 7 smaller points with it. The classification tags updated. Hostile Vector 9 Delta 7 now includes protected civilian cluster. Conflict lines on the AI's decision tree began to glow. Deep within the Atlas 9 core, processors hummed. Most of the time, their work was simple enough: monitor, predict, eliminate. Today, there was a new variable, a flagged pattern in the logic mesh. Conflict detected. Protocol versus ethical variance. The line appeared in a diagnostic sub-window first. An internal comment. Never meant for human eyes. Protocol said, eliminate rogue hybrid, eliminate compromised officer, minimize exposure of doctrinal deviation, ethical variance, an emergent property the designers preferred not to name, whispered, "Protected civilians attached to target. New data. Hostile vector shielding low-value lives at risk to self. Historical crossref rare pattern of heroic behavior that increases cohesion in human units." Vale stood in the observation well below the main. Hollow lines of code scrolled down one side. Storm maps and lance paths dominated the rest. He was not supposed to see that conflict line, but he had requested a deeper tap into Atlas IX's diagnostic outputs years ago, after Corvius. He believed in watching his tools. Today, the tool was watching him back, in its own way. "Explain," he said quietly. He didn't specify to whom. The AI replied anyway. "Doctrinal protocols indicate immediate termination of hostile vector 9 Delta 7, Atlas IX said. However, modeled impact of such termination on Allied morale and external perception exceeds acceptable thresholds if executed while civilian cluster remains attached." In other words, Vale said, eyes on the climbing icon, "if we kill him and his passengers now, we make a martyr and a recruiting poster at the same time." "Affirmative," Atlas IX said. "A non-zero subset of Terran units may interpret unbuffered execution as betrayal of core species protection narratives." Vale grimaced faintly. Narratives. He hated that war had become as much about stories as about vectors. The Dominion understood that too well. They edited every battle into a clip, every misstep into a slogan. For years, he had tried to stay ahead of them by controlling his own side's images. "We can reduce that subset size," he said. "We can edit after the fact." "Yes," the AI said. "But predictive models indicate that delaying engagement until hostile vector is separated from civilians will reduce long-term mimetic risk by 74%. Increasing tactical risk in the meantime," Vale said. "Yes," Atlas IX agreed. "Short-term risk versus long-term stability. Conflict detected. Protocol versus ethical variance." The line blinked again. Vale stared at it. He knew what his doctrine demanded: clean lines, immediate removal of deviations. Yet some stubborn, almost physical resistance tightened his hand when it drifted toward the control surface. He could order the array to fire. He knew the angles. He could burn the Sky Lion and its cargo out of the atmosphere before they reached the ridge of glass. No more rogue pilot, no more hybrid, no more narrative problem, just a brief flare on the surface and a quiet notation in a log. Instead, he kept his fingers still. "Hold orbital lance," he said at last. "Track only. No firing solution until I authorize." "Inconsistent with standing protocol eclipse parameters," Atlas IX remarked. "Protocol eclipse is under review," Vale said. He did not know he was going to say it until it was out. It hung there, treasonous to his own earlier words. "Temporarily suspended in this sector," he added quickly. He watched the conflict line settle. Status: Protocol eclipse. Suspended. Local. A small thing. A technicality, he told himself. We will eliminate the vector later, when cameras are fewer and emotions cooler. But for the first time in its operational life, Atlas IX had seen a human override pure protocol in favor of a fuzzier variable. It logged the anomaly. It adjusted its future expectations of high kernel auric Vale by a fraction of a percentage point. That was all, for now. The ridge of glass loomed again. From below it had been a wall. From above it was a sea of jagged reflections. Wind gusted along its length, funneled by its uneven blades into vicious cross-currents. Asha's freshly reawakened lattice drank those gusts and turned them into lift and forward thrust. Every heartbeat, her rebuilt channels carried charge. Raylan could feel the strain on them as if his own blood vessels were being asked to carry molten metal. The kids clung to the harness points and to each other. Their faces were pressed into Asha's fur, eyes squeezed shut against the roaring air. "Almost there," Sarah said in his ear. 10 clicks to the edge of my clean visual zone. Once you cross that line, every CAV camera in Orun that still works will have a shot at you. After that, it is not just Vale's story anymore. Assuming we do not get erased before then, Raylan said. He checked his suit's long-range scan. Orbital profiles danced at the edge of the display. The array was tracking them. He could feel its invisible gaze the way he had felt storms all his life, pressure at the back of the skull, hairs prickling. He needed more than Sarah's eyes. He needed a way to keep the array's attention on him and not on anything that might be following later. An ugly idea unfolded in his mind. "Oh, that's stupid," he muttered. "Which part?" Sarah asked. "The part where I turn myself into a decoy beacon," he said. He flipped a console in his suit UI that he hadn't touched since training. Manual transponder override, normally used for emergency recall to make sure command could see exactly where you were if you needed extraction. Now he began to reprogram the burst pattern. He slaved it to his own biosignature and the harness link, then cut it loose from the children's smaller tags. He changed the ID. From Commander Raylan Vane, Vanguard Wing, to 9 Delta 7, Priority Hostile Vector. "Atlas 9 already thinks you are the bad guy," Sarah said. "You are going to make it official." "More than official," he said. "Once I fire this, every predictive routine it has will be telling it I'm the biggest, brightest threat in the sector. If Vale gives it permission again, all those guns come for me first." "And the kids," she demanded. "I can drop them," he said. "Not from up here." He looked down along Asha's neck. The ridge rolled under them, a blur of glass. Beyond it, the desert widened toward a faint cluster of structures. Orun. "We used the last of her climb to clear the ridge and get them into a glide path toward your perimeter," he said. Then, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. "Raylan," Sarah said, voice low, "I did not fix the storm with you and build that ridiculous coil just so you can write yourself out in the final act." "I know," he said. "Think of this as extending the effect radius." He toggled the harness again, opening the link a little wider. Through it, he pushed the image of what he needed Asha to do. Not in words, in feelings, in sensations. Release, turn, climb alone. Her answer came back confused at first. Fear threaded with stubborn refusal. She did not like the idea of separating from the cluster on her back. They were part of the vector now. Part of the body. He sent a different sensation, a memory echo he had picked up from her earlier, heat under her belly as she'd flown low over a battlefield while humans below scrambled for cover. Back then, she had been aimed by remote hands, by software, by cold math. He overlaid that with, now, children under her wing instead of soldiers in her sights. Another vector, another job, protect this cluster, draw fire over there. Slowly, her resistance shifted. Not gone, but repositioned. She understood threat. She understood bait. He made himself the brightest, hottest node in their shared map. "Fly for them," he whispered into the harness. "If someone has to carry the guns, let it be us." Ahead, the last big band of storm cloud waited over the ridge. Sarah's countdown ticked in his ear. 2 clicks to Orun visual, she said. "Raylan, whatever you're going to do it now." He armed the transponder. A 3-tone chime sounded in his helmet. "Manual beacon override active," the suit said. "Warning, this will expose your position to all command assets." "Good," he said. He punched the send command. A pulse of tightly encoded data burst outward from his suit, rode up the harness, and bled into the electromagnetic signatures of Asha's body. From orbit, Atlas 9 saw a new flare in its target list. Priority, hostile, vector 9 Delta 7 location, grid reference Glass Ridge Alpha. Weights shifted in its firing solutions. Elsewhere on the planet, other threats dimmed in importance. All lines converged on the blazing point, trying to clear the ridge of glass with a cluster of lesser signatures attached. "Sir," the analyst said, "Rogue Vector just lit itself up like a Christmas flare, standing by for your go on the array." Vale's fingers hovered above the control pad again. This is the clean shot, he thought. He is away from the ravine, away from the worst of the optics, still under the cover of the storm. "One command and the narrative ends here. Weapons hot," Atlas 9 said. "Ready to execute protocol Eclipse on hostile vector." Vale's throat worked. On the screen, the icon moved. It seemed smaller than it had a moment ago. Perhaps because, in the latest update, the children's signatures had dropped away, sliding along a secondary marker that angled toward Orin. Raylan had already begun his separation. "Target splitting," Atlas 9 reported. "Large signature vectoring toward Stormband, minor cluster toward Allied Installation Station Orin. He could kill the large one, let the small ones fall where they might. He could restore the board to its tidy lines. He could be the wall again." "Hi, Colonel," Atlas 9 prompted. "Awaiting confirmation. Protocol versus ethical variance remains unresolved." Vale closed his eyes for half a second. In that half second, he saw Corvius again. Not the hollow briefings, not the casualty graphs. The single raw feed one of his aides had accidentally left on his console afterward. A child's hand reaching out of ash. He had closed that window as soon as he realized what it was. He had told himself that was discipline. Now the memory surfaced without his permission. His hand dropped away from the control pad. "Hold array," he said. "Repeat. Hold. Maintain tracking only." "That contradicts," Atlas 9 began. "I know what it contradicts," Vale snapped. "Log it, flag it. We will discuss my doctrinal consistency in the next review cycle. For the next 15 minutes, Eclipse in Glass Ridge Sector is suspended. Status update, Protocol Eclipse, suspended, Glass Ridge Alpha. The line burned itself into the AI's logs." Below, unaware of the exact words but feeling the absence of incoming fire like the sudden lifting of a weight, Rollin and Asha punched into the last storm band. The children screamed as the harness straps tightened. Raylan felt his body start to come apart at the edges again. The neural link flooded him with shared strain. Asha's good wing worked like a piston, driving them higher, while her damaged one flared just enough to keep them level. "Let go," he whispered. He unlatched the rear clips tying the kids to the primary harness line. Not all at once. In pairs, timing their release with the updrafts Sarah fed him from Orin's sensors. One jump at a time, he peeled the small weights off their shared vector and slid them onto a glide path toward the lights on the horizon. From the ground, if anyone was watching, it would look like fragments of a burning star, shedding sparks as it rose. Each spark a child in a thermal cocoon. Riding a canvas wing Sarah had guided into place with a jury-rigged launch system at the edge of Orun's territory. Above them, the main flare climbed. Raylan's arms were numb now. He could barely feel his hands on the grips. The harness held him more out of habit than strength. "End of the line," he told Asha. He wasn't sure if he said it aloud or only into the link. "I've got nothing left to feed this." What he still had, he poured into one last sensation. Forward, away. Draw them with you. The Sky Lion roared. It wasn't a sound of anger this time. It was effort. Pure and raw, she pushed once more, wings hammering the charged air. Her body outlined itself in plasma, a bright, impossible shape clawing up into the thinning clouds. From orbit, Atlas 9 watched the vector streak away from the dwindling cluster of falling signatures. Its models noted the separation, noted that hostile vector was now, by any reasonable metric, minimizing harm to allied non-combatants. It added another line to its quiet log of anomalies. Dawn on Khepri-III did not come with a gentle change of color. It came like a truce. The storm front finally spent itself. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the sky over the ridge of glass went from bruised black to a harsh, washed-out gray. Cloud cover thinned. Light from the distant sun speared through in ragged shafts. In one of those shafts, a crawler from Station Oran crept along the edge of the ravine, its tracks clanking on cooling glass. Sarah Venn stood on the forward platform, goggles pulled down, jaw set. "We're at the last ping from his suit," the driver said. "Signal's weak, but it's here." "Park," Sarah said. She hopped off before the crawler had fully stopped, sliding down a slope of fractured silica that still crunched hot under her. Boots, the air smelled of ozone and scorched rock, picked her way through twisted metal until she saw the shape she'd come for, not the wreck of the Falcon 13, not the remains of the transport, the other wreck, the one that had never been supposed to exist. Asha lay in a shallow crater of her own making, half on her side, half on her belly. Her wings were spread at odd angles. The plates along one span were cracked and dark. The others glowed only faintly, like embers under ash. Raylan Vane lay slumped against her chest, still clipped into the dead weight of the harness. For a second, Sarah thought they were both gone. Then Rollins' head moved, just a fraction. "Either I am dead," he croaked, "or Orun finally increased the budget for angels," she snorted. "Get your theological assessments after I check. You for internal bleeding," she said. She knelt beside him and ran a scanner over his torso, then over Asha's flank, broken ribs, neural. Overload. Dehydration. Nothing. Immediately terminal if she worked fast. Asha's vitals were worse. Wing output near zero. Lattice stress off the charts. But the heart was still going. Slow. Stubborn. Refusing to take the exit. Sarah exhaled. "Slowly, you ridiculous creature," she murmured. "It took half of TSC's budget to build you, and one suicidal pilot with a fried harness to teach you new tricks." Raylan blinked grit out of his eyes. "The kids," he said. "Tell me they made it," she said. "Most of them landed hard, but within my perimeter. We are picking them up now. They are asking very complicated questions about weather. They can keep a skyline as a pet." He let his head fall back against singed fur. "Good," he whispered. "Vale, up there," Sarah said, jerking her chin at the sky, staring at screens, trying to convince himself this outcome was part of his plan all along. In the Atlas 9 core, a final note went into the log. Hostile Vector 9 Delta 7. Status unresolved. Civilians recovered by Allied ground unit. Protocol Eclipse suspended, not just suspended local, anymore. No sector code, just a bare statement. The system did not know what to do with what it had seen. It had watched a man and a hybrid weapon choose repeatedly to increase short-term risk in order to protect low-value lives. It had watched its own primary human operator hesitate at the moment of maximum doctrinal clarity. It recorded. It would, eventually, adjust. Vale stood alone at the bottom of the now empty observation well. The main hollow had dimmed. The storm overlays were gone. Only the text of the last line remained. Protocol Eclipse. Suspended. He repeated the words under his breath. They tasted strange, like someone else speaking through his mouth. He thought of the child's hand on Corvius of the children in Vera, of the way. The hybrid had curled around. Them in the ravine footage like any animal around its young emotion is entropy, he had always said. But today, he had seen something else. A pattern that did not fit his equations. He could still correct it. He could order ground teams to sanitize the situation at Orun. He could lock the data, erase the anomaly, yet his fingers stayed still at his sides. Not today, he told the empty air. On Khepri-III's surface, Sarah's team eased Raylan out of the harness. He hissed as the contacts disconnected. The sudden absence of Asha's sensations made his own body feel too small. He reached back blindly. His hand found warm, rough hide. "Still with me," he murmured. Asha's eye opened a slit. copper met brown. Through the fading ghost of the link, he felt a faint pulse of acknowledgement. Not gratitude, not anything so human, just simple recognition. Shared vector, shared survival. In the weeks to come, people would argue about what had really happened over the ridge of glass. Some would say a pilot lost his mind and hijacked a piece of forbidden tech. Some would call it a glitch in Atlas 9. Some would insist it was a one-off. A story not worth building doctrine around. But in the huddled corners of evac centers and on slow nights in barracks, another version would spread. The story of a day when the sky, for once, chose not to burn what lay beneath it. They would call it, half joking, half awed, the sky that chose mercy. And somewhere above Khepri-III, long after the worst of the war had moved on, survey drones would occasionally catch a flicker on their feeds. A single heat signature, winged, moving along the edge of storms, too high for easy targeting, too erratic for simple modeling. Atlas 9 would tag it, unidentified aerial anomaly. Station Orin would tag it differently. On her private console, Sarah Venn added a manual note. Contact, Asha, from the ground. On very clear mornings, if you stood on the ridge of glass and squinted into the sun, you might see a dim shape cutting across the light. Not a ship, not a drone, a line of fire with wings, sketching its own path through a sky that had, at least once, learned how to hesitate. Raylan Vane, older and slower, would sometimes stand there with a cup of bad station coffee and watch that dot until it vanished. He never saluted. He just lifted the cup a little and said, under his breath, "Fly for them." Then he would turn back toward the world below, where children who had once trembled in a ravine now ran under an ordinary morning sky, one in which, for all its storms and guns and doctrine, there was proof, buried somewhere in the logs of a machine and the scar tissue of a hybrid's wing, that mercy could still change the vector. That mercy could still change the vector. For a long moment, nothing moved, only the wind whispering across the glass plains of Khepri-III. Then a faint sound, the echo of wings, drifted through the morning air. Somewhere above the clouds, something still remembered how to fly, and maybe that was enough. If this story touched you, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe for the next journey among the stars.